Have you given any thought to contributing to the melt? It's easy to do. Just click the Patreon link in the episode notes, and for as little as $3 a month, you can get access to bonus episodes, early access to regular episodes, and you can also participate in monthly Zoom meetups. It helps to keep the magic happening here at the Melt. So I encourage you to karmically entangle yourself with the Melt today by subscribing monthly for less than the price of a container of goatee wax, or a prosthetic pinky, or a half stick of DMT butter, or an inflatable casket, or the shrunken head of an Atlantean supermodel, or a woolly mammoth's merkin, or a crystalline replica of Baba Yaga's hut, or a capsule of Sasquatch dander.
This is Hunter Muse.
And this is Chris Snipes, and you are listening
to The Melt.
We're all familiar with how narratives get manipulated to serve the agenda of those who might profit in some way from it. As we've seen and heard about in past episodes, this agenda is often focused on disempowering us or trying to convince us that reality is other than it actually is. This is to say that we are being tricked into thinking that we are inconsequential and exist in a random universe that has no other purpose than to ensure that only the strong survive, and that there is nothing else to this existence other than what our senses, and the instruments that amplify our senses, can deliver to us. Regardless of this extravagant hoodwink, there are many who are having experiences that defy what is supposed to be possible. And even in this realm of experience, there are those who would try to taint it with fear and suspicion. Fear, as we know, is the security blanket of the uninquisitive. It's something that can always be counted on to produce the same results. Fear can claim to unite us when, in reality, it divides us. It makes friends look like enemies. It makes a world without boundaries and categories look unpredictable and intimidating. And, unfortunately, fear is a surplus commodity that can easily influence many. Those who would look to various forms of media rather than experience and explore the world for themselves are going to find themselves subject to many people and institutions trying to sell them their protection from this illusory fear. But many of us are seeing through this ruse. We are testing the waters ourselves and coming back fearless. Today's guest, Ryan Bledsoe, has had some of these seemingly impossible experiences, along with his father Chris Bledsoe, who was our guest on episode 94. And many of these experiences are with entities that we are trying to be conditioned to fear. Yet Ryan has had many positive experiences with these beings, just as his father has. When we chatted with Chris, he recounted the experience that set all of the subsequent experiences in motion. I start off the conversation by asking Ryan where he was when this experience took place and how it was that he found out about it.
So I was 13 years old at the time, and coincidentally that night, My mother, my other brother, and my sister and I, occasionally we would stay with our grandma. She's a widow. My grandfather died back in the 90s, and she just doesn't like to be alone in her house, like on weekends or things like that. So, occasionally we'd go stay with her and keep her company, and that happened to be the luck of the draw. We were there that weekend staying across town with my grandmother. And I was still, like, my mom, and for context, that was about 30 minutes across town, So, like, I was still being brought back to go to my school and then staying with her off and on in those days. And we had just moved into a new house, and it was just crazy. And anyway, so I didn't find out about the encounter until I got home from school, whatever the next day after the event was. I can't remember if it happened on like a Friday or whatever, because I was a little kid. But whatever the next school day was for me, I got off the school bus at my home. And, my dad, my brother, they're not home during the day until later that night. They were kind of like working. My mom was off doing, I don't remember what. Like I said, I was a kid. So a lot of days, my other grandparents, who at the time were both living, my father's parents, a lot of days back then, I would go spend the entire evening with them until my parents got home, because we were next door neighbors. So the reason I say that is when I got off the school bus that day, I go next door to my grandma and my grandpa's. Again, not the one that I was staying with across town the original night, right? That's 30 minutes away. Anyway, so I get off the school bus at my dad's parents' house, and it feels like that's the first thing my grandpa told me was, he said something to the effect of, boy, your dad's been smoking dope. He saw little green booger men. And I was like, what are you talking about? My dad doesn't smoke dope. He's a very straight edge guy. And anyway, I like didn't believe him or understand what he was talking about. I didn't know if he was being funny or what. And then it made sense when I saw my dad and my brother Chris Jr. that night, and they told me all about it, and I was just like blown away. But it's kind of ironic, the very first thing I heard about it was actually from my grandfather.
And it filtered through his perceptions of it, obviously.
Yes, it did. That was the first ridicule. Before I even knew about it, there was already the whole ridicule aspect.
Yeah, that slant on it. Yeah, the negative slant. Were your father and your brother still visibly shaken?
Oh yeah, they were very very frantic, like very excited, very excited to talk about it, And who wouldn't be, right? Anybody on earth would be. They'd be either terrified or really excited, or a mix of both, which they were. And I just knew, even though it was my brother and my dad, and even though I was a little kid, I know it sounds cliche, but I just knew that they were telling me the truth. Never for a second did I doubt them. I just was like open eyes, open ears, just sitting there in awe, listening to everything they had to say. And then, thank God, it was within a matter of days or weeks that I started seeing things in the sky myself, and orbs and all that good stuff. And I knew from then on, it was all true. But
wow,
yeah, it was a. Go ahead.
No,
I'm sorry.
No, please.
I was just gonna end that little phase with it was just very exciting and frantic and kind of like very high energy in the beginning. What's going on, and that eventually did subside a little bit.
Did your dad have to be present for things to occur? Or did you just see orbs when you would be out and about yourself?
I've never thought about that. In the very early days, my dad was always present. And the reason I saw them in the first place back then was because my dad would frantically, he would get us outside, because he was always looking every single night. And still to this day, most nights, as long as the weather's good and it's not too cold, he's out there looking. And I don't know if you've seen his Instagram, but he's still to this day, 15 years later, recording every night. And back in those days, it had just started. And back then, he was so frantic for us to see that it feels like every night or every other night, he was yanking us outside. Come look, they're here, they're here. And that's how I saw them. And for years, it carried on that way until now I'm at the point where I will, it doesn't matter where, I'll see them by myself. My wife and I were on our honeymoon in Las Vegas a few months ago, camping in a tent in the desert while we drove from Las Vegas to Arizona. Camped in a tent by the Grand Canyon, and we saw what felt like a dozen of them in the sky. I mean, it doesn't really matter where we are. And you know what they are when they appear, they get really bright, they shoot around, and then they disappear, Kind of have a little trademark.
And it seems like a lot on his Instagram feed. They appear in groups, right? And sometimes they kind of coordinate their movements together. What
That's true.
is there any idea that you have, or any reason that you think this might be happening to your family or to your father in particular?
That's something I've wondered my entire life. And if I'm just going to be perfectly candid here, this is a rabbit hole that, I haven't really gone down until recently in the whole public sphere. It was insinuated to us by people in the CIA and NASA and some of those affiliated intelligence organizations that there is a level of evolution happening to the human race, and that throughout time we are evolving where we can sort of perceive things like that, like of that nature and phenomenon, more rapidly and more readily as a species. And it was indicated to us that our family may have some sort of genetic thing going on that can allow us to have, altered psychic perception or be more in tune to these beings. I mean, I don't know. It's just speculation. I have no concrete answer. But the fact of the matter is that our species is evolving for sure.
And it seems like from what your father was saying that he kept quiet about it for a while because of lots of reasons, lots of ridicule, people misunderstanding, people calling it evil, whatever. But then it seems like he was urged by these beings to come out and start talking about it. Do you think that's because they have a particular message that they want to spread, or they just want people to know that they're around and that they're present? Or what's your take on that?
Well, I think it's both. I think it's the first and the second. They do have a particular message that they want spread, and from what they indicated to my father, it's that there is a higher power, that there is a permanent spiritual reality that all life comes and goes to and from between lives, and that all this bad stuff we see happening in the world is actually made to happen by very powerful, nasty groups of human beings who have hoarded wealth and power and various other things. And they didn't give them a name. The entities just called them a dark group. And that it's important in our day and time that the message of love and peace is spread so that the collective consciousness of humanity can eventually shift into that vibration and will actually save ourselves from destruction. Like all the wars and everything happening around the world, this might be a little bit of a hyperbole, but if we all just understood that there really is one true higher power that's not restricted by like a culture or a race or a religion, and it's present everywhere, all around us and within us for everybody to access, we might not kill each other as much,
Yeah, exactly. We're much easier to control if we're at each other's throats. Yeah, and fighting, and there's a lot of division going on right now. The latest would be, well, I guess the latest would be the Ukraine situation, but I think the COVID situation was utilized, sort of weaponized to divide people, to people who are pro-vax, anti-vax, pro-mask, anti-mask. There was a lot of strange things happening the last couple of years, and it really, I think, divided a lot of groups of people up even further than they were already.
I think you're absolutely correct on that, and I think that almost everything in the mainstream media is weaponized to divide everybody, period. And that's why I tell people to be very cautious about what they hear about, alien stuff or really anything.
So you like your father, I think you've had mostly positive, or if not all positive, experiences with these beings. Do you think that characterizes all of the interdimensional beings that you guys have had in contact with? I'm not being able to articulate my words right now for some reason.
I know exactly what you mean.
Yeah. Do you think they're all benevolent?
Exactly No, I don't. I think that, okay, so here's the thing. I believe we live in a, what you could call a multiverse. Now, let me just clarify. I don't think it's like you see in the movies necessarily, where like you can imagine yourself in another world, or like, the Marvel movies where there's 50,000 different Hulks, or, you get the point.
Sure.
And the way I kind of see things is more like various degrees of archetypal forces of reality overlapping to paint this picture that we all share collectively. You know what I mean? Like there's the molecular world, there's the plant kingdom, the mineral kingdom, and all of these systems and all of these little layers of reality interlap. And the spirit world is no different. And there are many realms, actually probably an infinite number of realms above us, so to speak, and below us. And the negative entities exist in lower vibratory dimensions or frequencies or whatever, where they can kind of like gnaw at your mind and plant dark thoughts into you to harm yourself or harm others. But I absolutely do not believe one bit or one shred of all the stuff about, some alien threat or anything of that nature. I think if you're seeing these things manifest on the visible spectrum, chances are they're probably really powerful, benevolent beings that have evolved over, many lifetimes to reach that point, just like we will sometime very far from now in the future.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So you think that the negative ones more operate on a sort of a mental plane?
Mm-hmm. I do. Yeah. I think that. Yeah.
That makes sense.
I remember we asked your dad if he'd had experiences previous to 2007, and he mentioned that he felt that he had as a child, and maybe had just mislabeled those experiences. Do you feel that you've had experiences prior to 2007?
Yes. There was a time, I'm very fuzzy on the age because the 2007 thing already happened when I was so young. I would estimate I was 10 years old. And it was something that we really never talked about again until recently, just because it was buried so deep with all the other stuff we were going through. But there was actually a night before 2007 that as a family we saw a UFO type thing. Back in about 2003, maybe. And it was this big green lit up thing that just, I don't even know how to describe it. It was kind of like it looked like a blimp almost, the shape. And it was very low to the ground, like just barely over the trees, it seemed like. And it just silently flew over us, and we saw it as a family as we were standing in the yard where we were considering building our future house where we eventually lived. Because my grandparents have owned that property for decades now. So my whole life, I was in and around that property. And yeah, that was my first thing. And I remember going to school the next morning. Oh yeah, so we were all together because it was Thanksgiving. So we had a big crowd of family that night. So it was 10 or 12 of us that saw this thing. And I just remember sometime the next day or the next week going to school and flipping through my little scholastic science journals trying to find stuff about it. I was so intrigued.
Wow. Did your family discuss it afterwards at all, or?
No.
Mm-mm. Huh. That happens a lot. Like experiences like that happen, and either at the time you kind of go, oh, there's a being or there's a craft or something, and then you just kind of go about your business, and for some reason it doesn't seem to have the impact that you think that it would until after the fact. And then you're like, what the hell just happened? I think Chris mentioned that, didn't he?
Yep.
Yeah. Do you feel like you've had more interactions than just seeing orbs? Like, do you sense on any level that you've been abducted or taken up or anything like that?
Well, I would say yes. There are 2 occasions consciously where I was touched by something that wasn't there, and then both occasions I turn around or I look and I see some sort of entity or big flash of light from an orb in the room in my home. This happened twice inside my home. And yeah, like I was physically touched on my ribs one time and on my shoulder. And I say physically so that, people understand I felt the sensation on my body, but there was no hand. There was no material hand. It felt like, the only way I can describe it is if you've had chills, dial it up 1,000, where every inch and every layer of your skin and your muscle is just like, basically cringing with magnetism. That's how it felt. It was extremely overwhelming, but not negative. It was kind of, pleasant. And there's several other times that I've seen orbs very close, 5-10 feet away, moving around on the visible spectrum with my eyes, no camera, with long, what I would call tails, basically. I mean, it's just light. And they shoot around and do all kinds of patterns. I mean, I've seen some really crazy, spooky stuff that
Interesting.
would really shock some people if they had no clue what they were seeing.
What do you think, Ryan, these things are? If you had to try to explain it to someone who's never had an experience like this, do you think that they're interdimensional beings? Do you think it's a craft that you're seeing, or is it an actual... I feel like the word alien is so overused, but do you think it's something that's coming from another layer of reality? What do you opine?
What I understand and believe them to be, based on the things they have communicated to my father and based on a lot of the material that I have studied that really resonates with me, I believe them to be eternal entities from what we could conceptualize as the spirit realm, right? Or, in ancient cultures, they may have been called fairies or genies or angels, or, in some Greek cultures, they would call them daemons, not necessarily connected to the biblical demon. It's a totally different word.
Sure.
Or, so on and so forth. And I think that ancient cultures have been basically talking about them the whole time, and we've had evidence that there are spiritual beings from a higher reality that come at different astrological ages to kind of phase us into the next level of evolution. And I do not believe that they're aliens from another planet. They actually told us quite the contrary. They told my dad specifically that they come from the eternal realm where we all will eventually go when we become as they are through the journey of evolution.
I find it fascinating that when Hollywood depicts energies that they call alien, there's always, other than like Close Encounters, there's always almost this nefarious or evil tinge to it. So I think the machine is trying to perpetuate this idea of fear when it comes to something that you might experience that's outside of the realm of consensus reality. Have you ever felt fearful when you witness these beings?
There were a few times that I saw some shadowy-like figures that I got the impression were not the same entities. And they were periods of extreme duress and just trauma in our family. It wasn't always love and light, it was very hard in the beginning, and we were having some pretty scary experiences. But ultimately, when these beings show up, they usually appear in a flash of light, or, they're very calming. And I would say interacting with and observing these orbs and this particular benevolent phenomenon, no, I've never felt fear, and I've been very, very close to them. Matter of fact, I've been touched by them twice and never felt fear. And every time they came, I actually felt very excited and very happy, very elated, and just always wanting more. I mean, it seems to be never enough. The more you see them, the more you want to see them.
And so what's drawn the line between these benevolent energies and these experiences that you had that felt more malevolent? Like, what do you think was the difference? Was the family in a more stressed state? So maybe your energy was attracting something that was maybe feeding off of that energy?
That's exactly what I think of it as. Yeah. Depending on and this is a very simplistic way of describing it. I mean, it's really not that simple, but the way I understand it is, whatever you're putting out is essentially what will be allowed to come back. Very simplistic way of saying it. But if you're in a very dark place and you're just feasting in negativity, and it's your daily cycle, unless you really petition for some intervention from something benevolent and you really consciously and verbally call on a higher power, like my dad did, believe it or not, in 2007, he did actually say a prayer, and that's kind of like why the experience kicked off. Yeah, I do think that being in that kind of negative state will attract some negative experiences and negative entities. And that's why I always try to encourage people to daily, every hour, focus on trying to change thoughts and words and habits to be something inherently positive.
For sure. Yeah, I think it's easy to forget how interconnected we all are, and that even if we don't voice something, or even if we don't act on something, our inner motivation is still there and it still broadcasts on some level. So I think it is good to, I mean, even the Buddhists say good actions start with good thoughts. So it's good
That's
to keep a positive sort of wavelength going on in your mind to broadcast out to others, because it'll, they'll pick it up on some level.
Yeah. Thoughts are things.
Thoughts are things. Yeah, absolutely. So everything was set in motion besides the one thing that happened with your family, that when you guys saw the craft in 2007, but then your dad had an encounter with the lady, and then things sort of shifted, didn't it? Like, people started paying attention. People started coming to your family and asking things and showed interest. What was that all about, do you think? Why did things amp up after that encounter?
It's because the way I understand it is this. The people in power, particularly, I like to call them the 1%, because it's pretty hard to confuse who that is.
Yeah.
And, using simple research skills, you can, not you, but just anyone, the listeners or whoever, can intuit that the 1% have their hands in the military, the intelligence agencies, the media, and everything, comes from the top down. And these people who have essentially been at the top of the pyramid of this entire planet or realm that we inhabit for the last thousands of years have always understood that the truth is inherently spiritual, that there is a realm that can be interacted with to create a certain effect on this reality. And essentially, I'm going to be honest, could you reword the question one more time?
Well, it seems like, I don't remember exactly when he saw the lady, but in between the time...
I remember it now.
Yeah,
I'm
okay.
sorry. I remember.
No, that's
now.
okay. Yeah.
Okay, so why they came? Because when you understand that the truth is inherently spiritual, and you get into like the really deep ancient stuff, it's kind of self-evident that reality itself is like this dual paradox, right? There's throughout nature, you just see these patterns of masculine and feminine forces requiring some type of union to create life all throughout the cosmos. Is that pretty easy to say is true?
Sure.
Yes.
So the divine is no different. And my point being, if this is true, if this is a law of reality and a law of nature, then the divinity or the godhood or whatever you want to call it, there has to be a union or balance of masculine and feminine forces for all life and creation to exist. Now, when this lady came, she told my father that this entity, this 2012 encounter.
Yeah.
And she basically called herself Hathor, and she said that she was essentially the mother of all creation, of this reality, of all time and all life and all existence. And when he had that experience and he started talking about it publicly, that's when the CIA started showing up on our door. And in private, they were telling us things like they know who she is. They've revered her for thousands of years in these secret societies. She's popped up all over the world. Even in military operations, they had iconography of her. Like on NRO mission patches, they had homages to her, depicting her as a Greek deity with a trident and magical flame in her hand.
Crazy.
And they told us straight up they know who she is, and they desperately want to know what she wants and why she's coming and why she showed up to my dad. And they made him write down all of the things she said, and they, believe it or not, they took it to the Pentagon and insinuated to us that they briefed the former President Barack Obama on these experiences, and they actually sent us a seal of Camp David stamped on a napkin in the mail following that experience.
I have kind of a follow-up question. I'm currently reading a book called The Gospel of Mary Magdalene, and
I'm familiar. I've read it.
it's a really beautiful book. And she was basically the founder of Christianity, and for all intents and purposes was not a prostitute. She was Jesus's wife, and has been maligned throughout history, which kind of goes along with this duality of the male and female energy. I believe, and I have a sense that this female that you're talking about is somehow aligned or connected with that Magdalene energy, that essential female spirit. What I wonder is, what are your thoughts about Jesus Christ? Do you think he was perhaps one of these beings?
That's a good question. I got to tell you, I've done a couple dozen interviews now, and it pains me to say I've never been asked that question. Big moment for me. I love going into the esoteric history of Jesus and Mary Magdalene. So in Grail traditions, or in esoteric traditions, Mary Magdalene is actually secretly considered the true Holy Grail. The concept that she did bear the womb of the Christ, and had his children. And do I know or believe that that's true? No. But I think, as with any exoteric religion and esoteric religions, the truth is hidden in the metaphor. And I think that Jesus and Mary are kind of like a more recent version of Osiris and Isis, if that makes sense. Like, they're kind of like an archetypal revival of that. And throughout time, we keep seeing these certain sage prophet figures pop up throughout history. Typically, they do have a female counterpart woven into the myth. And when you go into did you read that in the Nag Hammadi scrolls?
I'm actually reading the book, the Gospel of Mary Magdalene,
by Elaine Piggles. No, that's by somebody else.
It's by Jean-Luc. Jeez,
Okay.
I can't remember his
I
last
can't
name.
either. Some French
I haven't
dude.
read that one. I've read the Gospel of Mary in the Nag Hammadi scrolls, which is an ancient text.
Yes.
And so yeah, very interesting. And there's this whole thing called Gnosticism, where they basically found these alternative texts of Jesus and Mary and the disciples, historically dated to be from the time of Jesus. They found them in clay pots in Egypt in like the 1950s, and they tell a totally different story about reincarnation and multiple levels of spiritual evolution till eventually returning to the original God above God, the higher consciousness or whatever. And I tend to think that that's the real version. And when you look at the history of early Christians, I don't mean reading the Bible like most people do. I mean like an academic, scholarly approach, which was, the way I did it in college. You tend to find out that there is very, very strong evidence that the early Christians were preaching reincarnation up until the year 545. Then it was banned by the Emperor Justinian of Rome. So to me, if there's real canonical historical context that the Christians were in fact teaching reincarnation, and then you have these Nag Hammadi scrolls talking about what you're saying, and Jesus talking about reincarnation, to me that suggests that the Bible is probably the corporate Vatican version.
Exactly.
Yes.
To cover up the real version that we're not getting in the mainstream. That's just my opinion on it.
Well, and what it did was it disempowered women. That was one thing. And this book actually does go through the Nag Hammadi and just line for line translates what was said. And it's so interesting because the version of the Bible and what the Bible says compared to what the Nag Hammadi says are so different. So when she finds him and he is resurrected on that day, and I just love this because we're coming up on Easter. When she finds him, he says, the way the Bible interprets it is that he says, "Don't touch me." Now, what the Nag Hammadi translation is "Don't cling to my body." Like, don't see this as this is me. Like, I'm beyond this. So don't cling to this physicality that you're observing right now. So I just feel like my sense was when I started to speak to you and listen to you, I feel like there's this resonance with this other energy that is ancient, that it's not necessarily some being that's come from the future. This is something that's always been.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's eternal. I think the beings are eternal. I think that consciousness is eternal. And it's like what the ancients said, you know, we truly are. I imagine our true form and whatever highest version of reality we emanate from is probably just pure light or pure vibration or pure consciousness or et cetera, et cetera. And when we experience this realm, you know, it's crazy because there's actually speculation that this is going to sound so off the rails, but I just watched a documentary the other day called The Spirit Molecule.
Yes.
And
yeah,
yeah,
DMT?
it's great. Great. Yeah, it's great.
Yes.
And like the conclusion that they kind of wanted to hypothesize was that the molecule DMT, which is found all in nature, all in the plant kingdom, all in the animal kingdom, it's in the human brain, it's constantly transmitting throughout the body in trace amounts. The conclusion that they were trying to understand was that DMT may perhaps be the chemical that transmits consciousness. So I tend to imagine us being these eternal conscious beings that kind of come through this little dimensional portal, and next thing you know, boom, you're spawned in this limited little physical body, you know, attaching consciousness to your vessel through DMT or whatever you want to imagine it as. And the whole reason we're here in the first place is to learn karmic lessons from previous lives. That's the way I like to see it.
Sure. Well, I mean, since we're on the subject, you grew up in a Pentecostal family, so you were very devout believers in the Bible and Jesus, all of that. Have these experiences taken that in a different direction? Are you able to weave them together? Have they changed your ideas about any of that?
I'll put it to you this way. I grew up, like you said, Pentecostal holiness, which for those who aren't familiar, when you think old-timey Southern religion, that is the peak, the pinnacle. It's like 2 steps below Amish, you know? Mm-hmm. Amish being you live in, you know, on little horses and buggies out in Pennsylvania. Then you have the Mennonites. Then you have the Pentecostals, which are like you live in society, but you're shunned if you take part in it kind of thing, you know? And like skirts to the knees for women, never wear makeup, never pierce your whatever, hair down to your ankles. I'm not judging, I'm just saying, painting the picture. And here I am at 28 years old talking about reincarnation, you know? So,
So yes.
Yes, big yes, huge yes. The beings utterly shocked and devastated my worldview at a very young age. And I've found that since 13 years old, I've been trying to pick those pieces back up and put them together and figure out what it is I understand and believe. And I have a very unbreakable belief in the things that I say because of the experiences that I've had, you know, the beings. I mean, once you've been touched a few times by an entity and you see it face to face, it's very hard to forget.
So you mentioned the CIA approaching your family or your father after he saw the lady for the first time. Who else? The Vatican was a part of that? And
NASA.
Why? NASA? Yeah.
Yep.
I mean, did they all have basically the same interest, or were they coming at it from different angles?
Well, at first they came to sort of keep tabs and, how can I say this? I would like to say damage control. Like they did put out the documentary, kind of in a shady way. It was under the guise of MUFON and Discovery Channel. It's been insinuated to us, from very high level CIA officer that the guy who was running MUFON at the time was CIA in the first place. Then NASA came, very nice guy for all intents and purposes when he was at our home. But then when you read some of his books, he literally says in his own firsthand writings that he was tasked by Alan J. Hynek in the 60s and 70s or whenever they ran Project Blue Book to covertly infiltrate UFO experiencers and try to debunk them. And, you know, it seems the shoe fits, and that's what he was trying to do to us. And obviously it didn't work. He didn't debunk us. And he stayed our friend for 11 years until the very day he died. And then naturally the lady thing happens in 2012, and then the CIA started overtly coming to our home and identifying who they were and flashing, identification and things like that. And it really kicked off from there.
And what has been your family's relationship with all of these organizations? I mean, there's a lot of, in conspiracy culture, there's a lot of bad talk about the alphabet agencies and the government and NASA lying about various things. What has been your relationship with the? I mean, it seems like it's been, for the most part, positive, right?
No, I wouldn't say for the most part. I would say our relationship has been on an as needed basis. And I say that. And I also would say that the majority of the stuff you read on the internet, conspiracies about intelligence agencies being involved in nefarious things, probably true. Probably very true. But what I would encourage people to understand is, if this isn't a movie, this is real life. And imagine you've had a profoundly traumatic experience that nobody around you not only don't understand it, but they're not even willing to listen. And then to take it a step further, they call you a liar, or you're, dealing with demons, or you're evil, or you're crazy, or whatever. You really have no one to turn to. And when NASA and the CIA started coming early on, without really knowing all of that stuff about the conspiracies, I didn't even really find out about that stuff until I was 18 years old. And by that point, they were already, ingrained in our lives. At that point, when people who appear to be ordinary people are knocking on your door or calling and asking to come over, and then you have a good time, all that stuff goes to the wind. But over the years, you notice the things they say and you put the pieces together. Does that make sense? Without going into too much detail. And,
sure.
I will say that I have lived since I was a child around spies, professional United States of American or whatever spies, on the clock, on duty. And I will say I do not trust the intelligence agencies. I have some friends associated with them, and it's kind of like these waters can be tough to navigate when it's your real life and you're the one in the situation, knowing these people, knowing they're listening to everything you say on the internet.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
But my conscience wants me to do the right thing, so it's just really tough to navigate,
Mm-hmm. I could imagine.
So when you were unpacking these experiences over the course of your life, especially since it's happened since you were so young, as you've gotten older, have you ever considered that perhaps your family was an experiment, that somehow these nefarious government agencies were actually using you, and these experiences were, screen memories that you had?
Yeah, people have suggested that to me before, but I don't think that that's possible. They didn't come around until after the experiences, and the only way that could work is if they somehow or another tracked us for years and found our routines and put drugs in our drinks, or shot us with some super secret, mind-altering radar gun or something. Like I just don't know how that could be a thing.
That sounds very Hollywood.
It does. It sounds
the
very Hollywood. I personally, I don't even know that they're capable of that, to be honest. I think Hollywood makes them look bigger and badder than they are always.
Yes.
Right.
Sure.
I don't know that they're that capable.
And that's a strange advantage that you have over most of these folks that bandy around stories about the CIA and the FBI and all that, is that you have these organizations broken down into a series of human beings. Like, you've just encountered them face to face, one-on-one, and not, sitting at a desk in a smoky room with a swinging light overhead. You've dealt with them, at eye level. So
I've had to sleep on the couch many nights with NASA scientists using my bed in my room, like it's just, that's just something that I wish people would understand, that these people were in our home since I was a child, and they came. We have never called government people up and been like, hey, come check us out. They always, 100% of the time, back then and even now, still to this day, they're still reaching out. Something that we'll probably go into publicly more down the road.
Sure.
But they always reach out to us, and we always say, sure, it's a Southern hospitality thing. We'll let you come by and shoot your shot. And some of them we've stayed friends with because they're just really cool people, and we don't buy any of the shit that they're touting.
Right.
It's tough waters to navigate.
So how did it first happen that they came to you? How did they know
I was
to
gonna ask
come to you, your family specifically?
So this is the spooky part. When I was 15 years old, this was very shortly after, this was less than a year after the documentary aired. I'm home from high school on summer vacation. So you know how teenagers are. Stay up late, play games with their friends, or hang out or whatever. So I'm in bed or something in my pajamas, 10 or 11 a.m. I don't know, whatever teenager. I just remember I was in my pajamas, and the doorbell rings, and I go answer the doorbell, and it's the guy from NASA, Hal Povenmire, and he says, "Hey, is Chris Bledsoe here? Do I have the right address?" I said, "Yeah, that's my dad." And he said, "Oh, great! I just drove 12 hours from Cape Canaveral, hoping to have a chance to talk to him." And I was like, "Whoa." Let me call my dad real quick, or something like that. Mom, NASA's here. And ever since then, they've been in our lives. And like I said, before he came around, the documentary happened the previous year. And it was later explained to us that the guy who was in charge of MUFON at the time was involved with the intelligence community. We just didn't know it at the time.
Yeah, and they didn't make you look all too positive or stable in that documentary either. You're talking about the one that aired on Discovery Channel?
Discovery.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. They made us look terrible.
How did they Discovery find you? Did you guys contact them, or how did they know that you?
Yeah, it was MUFON. So when my dad had his experience January of 2007, obviously he's very excited. He's frantic. I mean, it really happened. My dad is a very honest guy, and in his mind, he's going to tell his friends and family, and they're going to believe him, right? Because he would believe them, which was very naive, admittedly. Nobody knows, that no one's going to believe you when you have that kind of thing. And he comes home, he tells my mom, he tells his siblings, and whoever wants to hear, and they all think he's crazy. They all tell him it's not true. He has nobody in the world except for his children. And for 10 months, he sat in his room in depression until October of 2007. He finally sent the report to MUFON. So that's 10 months that nobody really outside of our very small circle of people knew about it. When MUFON got the report from my dad, within days, they sent him a package in the mail requesting him to draw the shape of the crafts and things in the sky that he saw, as well as the entities, because he typed up a pretty lengthy description about what happened to him, including the entities and this and that. And when they came to us later, they said, we knew the second you sent that report that it was 100% true because of the way that you described the entities in the craft. It matched real government records from the 1950s of those same entities approaching the United States government. Wow. And there were witnesses and everything. And they even showed us diagrams from the 50s, and they were identical to my dad's drawings of the craft and of the beings. And MUFON was at our house. They were investigating for weeks, back and forth. Then they got the director of MUFON involved, and it was their priority case. And next thing you know, they're asking us to bring the Discovery Channel. And we just said yes all the way. And, we never knew that they were going to do us dirty.
Yeah, that's too bad. So when, after the lady encounter happened and the Discovery Channel happened, was one of the people that approached you, is that where Tyler Durden came into the picture? From in case
yes, that's it. Yes.
Nobody knows out there, from American Cosmic, which is a book by Diana Pasulka. Excuse me. So maybe if you could describe Tyler and how he approached you guys. Did he seem like a stand-up guy, or?
So he came around after my dad experienced this female entity. And I can't exactly remember the day that they got into contact, because my dad had been talking with him previously, and he just talks to so many people, I never know who's who until I meet them, really. And he tells me, hey, this Friday, we're having somebody from the government come. I want you to be here, and we all need to meet this guy. And I'm like, okay, sure. So all I know is in 2013, October, he shows up at our house. And when he comes, he shows us some identification. They weren't badges, but they were like, little, I don't know what you call them, the technical term.
Lanyards?
Anyway, like a lanyard kind of thing. Yeah. Like, he had those in an envelope. And he had 5 or 6 of them. He had CIA, he had Air Force, he had Area 51, he had, I can't remember the other one, NASA. He had NASA.
Are they like coins?
No, they're like what you would wear on your neck, like if you're on the job,
Gotcha.
But they're not badges. I was corrected by a CIA guy when I called it a badge one time. That's why I say, well, they're not badges, but I don't know the term. I made a comment to one of my CIA friends about seeing a badge, and he was like, well, we don't carry badges, we carry this. I just can't remember what he called it. But anyway, a little lanyard around your neck with a laminate little slip with a piece of paper identifying who you are and what government facility you're with or whatever. He had 4 or 5 of them. Flashed them to us. He was there on business. This is the guy who made my dad write those encounters, and he took them to the Pentagon, and then he sent us the napkin from Camp David with the seal on it. And, I would say stand-up guy, I don't know. My metric for stand-up guy is different than others because I've lived in this world of secrecy and mystery, and my driving core function of my soul has always been, when I'm able to do it, tell as many people as possible at least what I know and understand to be the truth. And to me, these entities and individuals who do not do that and who hoard these secrets and they don't share it and make it readily available with the rest of the world, I don't necessarily classify that as stand-up. I think that's negligent at best.
And he ended up sort of profiteering from your guys' experience too. Something having to do with, was it the rights to your story?
Medical research.
Okay.
No, It was medical research.
Gotcha.
So, and excuse me if I'm sniffling, I do have really bad allergies. North Carolina is the worst allergy state and pollen's out, so I'm kind of trying to be discreet, but I've got such bad allergies.
You're forgiven.
But, thank you. So, I'm so sorry, I forgot because of the sniffling thing. You were asking,
how did he profit from...
How did he profit? Okay.
Yeah.
So what happened was my dad started getting involved in a kind of like a psychic research stint with people in the government, and they were very fascinated by his psychic abilities. He had been known early on to be able to remote view with high accuracy. He was doing that even back in 2007 and 8 when they were like doing the original investigation and filming the documentary. And it wasn't anything that he knew about or understood was even real in the first place. It just would happen to him. And he would start remote viewing people, and he would describe it and literally give people just incredible shock. Like one of the guys who was the main investigator of the original case was actually a Homeland Security guy. And my dad talked to him on the phone and said, I see you in a convertible car and you're driving with a beautiful female on the way to dinner. Now I see you sitting at a table and you're drinking wine. And the guy said, oh my God, I'm on a date right now with my girlfriend. Just things like that would happen.
Wow.
They ended up sending him a Army intelligence manual for remote viewing training. Dad never got involved with that back in those days. And then post 2012, he started meeting the CIA people and really started diving deep into relationships with the ex-members of Project Stargate, which is what the film The Men Who Stare at Goats is about. So just all that backstory is necessary. So he started getting into psychic development, and it was understood in these intelligence circles that he had profound ability. And this guy, Tyler D., started testing this with my dad. And one day, one of the tests was he sent my dad an image of a sunflower. And he said I don't exactly remember, but he said something like, study this image and let me know if anything profound occurs or if you have any sort of dreams or visions. Just let me know. The night my dad goes to bed, that night, after seeing that email, he has a dream. And in his dream, he, as dreams go, you just understand things differently. You don't necessarily need to be told. You just feel it and you understand it. And he understood that there was an advanced cellular function that modern science had not yet understood in the way that it could maintain and distribute energy on a cellular level. And he wrote that down and he drew diagrams in his dream, or from his dream. He sent that to Tyler D., the guy, And he ended up having a complete breakthrough on one of his secret cancer medicinal research projects in a laboratory in Africa. He ended up having a profound breakthrough that netted him millions of dollars off the patent based
Wow.
on that. Yeah.
Crazy.
That is insane. So is that how you guys were introduced to the Invisible College? Through Tyler?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And for those who aren't familiar with that concept, what is the Invisible College, and is it a thing, or is it just sort of a how you refer to a certain group of people?
Yeah, like there's no, to my knowledge, there's no group that is like, we're the Invisible College. You know, like I don't think that's the way they talk about themselves. What I
Sure.
understand it to be is that the elite members of the scientific, the intelligence, the aerospace, and the military world, and I mean the elite, who are in the know, or at least as close as possible in this whole paranormal, UFO, psychic realm, those people have met, they have bonded, they formed private friendships and relationships, and so to speak, study partnerships and research partnerships, and they kind of hoard their knowledge and they help each other push these, breakthroughs on a scientific level. And that is what you would call the Invisible College. It's the elite members of all of those fields who know each other and they work together to figure this stuff out. But again, they're invisible. They don't share what they know. At least not now, not previously.
And sometimes they don't even share it with each other, right?
Yes,
Like,
that's true.
Yeah,
that's very true.
There's kind of pockets within
I know that
pockets.
for a fact because I've met them.
Yeah, I'm sure. And so where does you guys meeting Diana Pasulka, come into the picture?
Okay, so in April of 2012, actually, funny thing, that's when my dad first saw the female entity that really kicked off all the CIA stuff. He saw her Easter night, 2012. A couple weeks later, my dad and I drive to Asheville, North Carolina, which is a pretty good drive from where we're from. It's about 6 to 7 hours or something like that. So we get in the car, we drive several hours away on a weekend to go speak at a small kind of like venue of 50 to 100 people, organized by MUFON for people to come hear my dad, talk about his experiences. Because back in those days, we were doing that quite a bit, like small groups, people wanting to hear it and stuff like that. Just to have people to talk about it with and kind of feel like, people accepted us. And when we got there, people obviously didn't know about the lady encounter because it had just happened about 2 weeks before. So they're expecting to hear about the original encounter, the one the documentary was about. And my dad starts speaking about the lady. And believe it or not, he gets heckled by the crowd. And they start saying, "We want to hear about the river." And people are just being rude. Yeah,
Wow.
Believe it or not. There's some crazy people. When you go to these groups and these functions, there are really people who just expect that they have their hand out. And they're like, "Just tell me. I don't care about you. Just tell me." There's really people like that. That's the reality of my childhood. And anyway, yeah, they were heckling him. They didn't want to hear that crap. They wanted to hear about the stuff that was on TV. And Diana was in the audience. And the professor who wrote the book, American Cosmic. And we later found out that she organized the event in secret because she heard about my dad and she wanted to meet him.
Uh-huh.
Came up to us after the thing was over. I wouldn't say convention. It was really small. Introduced herself. We got to talking. She started telling us a little bit about herself. She lives in Wilmington, which is where I currently live. And that's only 2 hours away from Fayetteville, which is where we were at the time. So we're like, oh, wow, that's so cool. We live close by. We go to Wilmington all the time for the beach. They struck up a friendship. They were in talks of writing a book together, working on a Hollywood film together with the writers of The Conjuring, which is like a really amazing horror film. You can just search The Conjuring.
Uh-huh. Oh, we've seen it.
Anyway,
Definitely.
Okay, cool. A lot of people, believe it or not, aren't that into horror, so I feel like I have to really clarify when I'm speaking about horror films.
Yeah, sure.
At least in my life. But so they got involved in that regard, and we're talking about these things, and it just never worked out. But so where she came into the picture was at some point along the way, my dad introduced the two. He connected them, Diana and the guy from American Cosmic. And they ran off with it and started doing their research, and that was that.
Well, that seems as good a place as any to end the first free hour. To hear the remaining hour of the interview, you can go to patreon.com/themeltpodcast, and for as little as $3 a month, you can hear extended episodes, exclusive episodes, and early episodes. And you also will get a chance to take part in our monthly Melt meetups, the next one being this coming Sunday, Easter. The topic will be, what does it mean to be free? And we might even have a guest appearance by Paul Unslaved, who actually will be interviewing in the near future for an upcoming Melt episode. If you don't know who that is, I would suggest looking up his YouTube channel. It's Paul Unslaved. Great stuff. In the second hour, we discuss MyLabs, the Revelation farce, alien disinfo, the deception of materialism, the year 2025, and his podcast, Bledsoe Said So. Thank you all so very much for listening. Much appreciated. And until next time, take care, people. If you've liked what you've heard and would like to contribute to The Melt, there are a few ways that you can do that. The most tangible would be financially. Just click the Patreon link in the episode notes, and there you will find ways that you can contribute for as little as $3 a month. This will give you access to bonus episodes, early access to regular episodes, and you can also participate in monthly Zoom meetups. Contributing financially will also help make The Melt better, pay the bills, and help to make this podcast a full-time endeavor that I can fully devote my time to and provide you with more content. Another way of contributing would be to go to wherever it is that you subscribe to The Melt and give it a favorable review or rating, and this will help it to reach more people. You can also spread the word to friends and family via social media, email, or word of mouth. And lastly, if none of those options are readily available or appealing to you, simply send your positive thoughts and intentions. In an interconnected and quantumly entangled multiverse, these also go a long way. Thank you.